Hello everyone, and welcome back to another chilling episode of True Ghost Stories. Tonight, we begin with an eerie account of a demonic attack that will make you question the reality of the unseen forces around us. This is a first-hand experience of terror, an encounter with an evil entity that sought to claim a soul. Sit back, turn off the lights if you dare, and let's dive into the story. When I was 17 years old, I experienced something that changed my life forever. An encounter so terrifying that even now, decades later, I still wake up in a cold sweat just thinking about it. My name is Daniel Hayes, and back in the late 1980s, my family and I lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood of Crestwood, Illinois. Our home was nothing out of the ordinary, just a simple suburban house like any other. But what I didn't know then was that something sinister lurked within its walls, waiting for the right moment to strike. It all started on an ordinary evening. I had just returned home from my part-time job at a local grocery store around 5:30 p.m. As I stepped into the house, the familiar aroma of my mom's cooking filled the air. She was at the stove, stirring a pot of her famous beef stew. "Hey, Mom," I said, leaning in to see what was on the menu for dinner. She smiled and gave me a quick nod, too focused on her cooking to chat. I kissed her on the cheek and made my way to my bedroom. Since dinner wasn't ready yet, I decided to relax and listen to some music. Lying on my bed, I put on my large, padded headphones and tuned into my favorite rock station. The DJ announced the next song, one I had heard 100 times before. It was a classic, a song by the Beatles. As the melody began, I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. But then, something strange happened. At first, it was subtle, a faint sound, almost like a whisper, beneath the music. I thought it was just static interference, so I adjusted the volume. That's when I heard it clearly. A voice, low and guttural. "Satan, Satan, Satan." A chill ran down my spine. My hands went cold. My breath hitched in my throat. I pulled off my headphones immediately and sat up in bed. My heart was pounding. The room suddenly felt different, heavier, darker. "No, no, no," I muttered, shaking my head, trying to dismiss it as my imagination. And then, before I could react, I felt it, a force, an invisible, ice-cold grip, pushed me back down onto the bed. I gasped, but before I could scream, I felt hands that weren't my own. They wrapped around my throat, tightening, suffocating me. I thrashed wildly, kicking and grabbing, but there was nothing there. Yet, I could feel it, the weight of a body pressing down on me, pinning me to the bed, the fingers digging into my skin, the sensation of rough, wart-covered flesh. My room, once warm and safe, had turned into a freezing, suffocating prison. It felt like I had been plunged into a place devoid of life, devoid of hope. And then came the smell. The stench of sulfur filled my nostrils, thick and suffocating. It was the unmistakable scent of something unholy, something demonic. My lungs burned as I struggled for air. My vision blurred. My body grew weak. It was going to kill me. I knew, in that moment, that if I didn't do something, I would die. I tried to scream for help, but my voice was trapped inside my throat. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed under its weight. The only thing left for me to do was pray. But I couldn't even do that. Every time I tried to form the words in my mind, they slipped away like sand through my fingers. It was as if the entity was inside my head, blocking me from calling out for help. The room seemed to close in on me, the darkness stretching out like an abyss. The air grew heavy, suffocating, pressing against my skin like an invisible force trying to snuff out my very existence. Then, out of pure desperation, I forced a single thought to break through the haze. God, have mercy on me. I'll change. I'll be good. And just like that, it was gone. The pressure on my chest disappeared. The cold lifted. The putrid smell vanished in an instant. I gasped, sucking in air, my body trembling violently. My bedsheets were soaked with sweat, and my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I sat up slowly, scanning the room with wide, fearful eyes. There was nothing there, no shadow, no presence, no sign that anything had ever happened. But I knew it had. Something evil had been in my room that night, something that had tried to take me. And if I hadn't called out to God, I have no doubt that I wouldn't be here today to tell this story. For hours, I sat there, afraid to close my eyes, afraid to turn off the lights. Every small creak of the house sent my heart into a frantic race. I knew I had survived, but something inside me had changed. I had faced something beyond comprehension, something dark, something malevolent. The next morning, my mother noticed my pale complexion and the way my hands shook as I reached for my breakfast. I wanted to tell her, but how could I? Who would believe me? So I kept silent, carrying the weight of that night alone. Years later, I would hear similar stories. Accounts from others who had felt the same dark presence, who had been attacked in their sleep. Some called it sleep paralysis. Others called it a demon. Whatever it was, I knew it was real. There are things in this world that we can't explain. Forces beyond our understanding. Some people might dismiss encounters like this as sleep paralysis or an overactive imagination. But those of us who have lived through it, who have felt the cold grip of something unseen, we know the truth. Evil exists, and it's always waiting, lurking in the shadows, searching for a moment of weakness. Perhaps, the only thing standing between us and the darkness is faith. If you've ever had a similar experience, I urge you to share it. Sometimes, speaking the truth is the only way to fight back against the unknown. Thank you for listening to this terrifying true story. If you've ever had a similar experience or know someone who has, let us know in the comments. And remember, be careful when you're alone, because you never know who, or what, might be watching. Stay safe, and see you in the next story. Story 2. There are moments in life when the past reaches out, defying logic and reason, wrapping us in a nostalgic embrace. But what if that embrace is not from a memory, but from something that refuses to leave? I never considered myself a superstitious person. Ghosts, spirits, hauntings, all those things seemed like the ramblings of the overly imaginative. But everything changed on that night when I felt my cat return from beyond. It was a quiet evening. Just like any other, I had finished my routine, brushing my teeth, turning off the lights, and settling into bed with the familiar silence of my small apartment. The air was still, and outside, the occasional rustling of leaves against my window provided a soothing white noise. My cat, Luna, had passed away 6 months prior. A heart attack had taken her swiftly, leaving an emptiness that even time struggled to fill. As I drifted into sleep, something stirred me awake. At first, it was subtle, a feeling more than a sound. The faintest pressure at the foot of my bed, a light shifting of weight against the covers, so gentle, so familiar. I had felt it countless times before. Back when Luna would jump onto my bed and knead the blankets before curling up beside me. My heart clenched. Could it be possible? Was my mind playing tricks on me? Or was something else at work? The sensation moved closer, step by step, an invisible weight pressing against the mattress. Creeping toward my side, I held my breath. It felt warm, reassuring even, like an old friend returning home. Then, the pressure settled right next to me, as if a small body had curled up against my ribs. A soft exhale left my lips. It was Luna. I was sure of it. I wanted to move, to reach out, to confirm what I felt. But I was frozen, my body, unresponsive. It was as if a force held me down, refusing to let me acknowledge what was happening. Panic clawed at my chest. My eyes darted to the side, straining to see something, anything, that would prove I wasn't losing my mind. The room remained unchanged, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. Yet, the weight beside me remained. My breath grew shallow. I had read about sleep paralysis before. How the brain could trick the body into feeling things that weren't there. But this wasn't just a feeling. It was her. Minutes passed, long, excruciating minutes. I could feel every fiber of my being screaming for me to turn my head, to look, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the weight lifted, the warmth vanished, the air grew colder, and an overwhelming silence filled the space where she had been. My limbs unlocked, my muscles tensed, and I finally sat up, gasping. Nothing. The bed was empty. My chest ached, torn between relief and a profound sadness. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Or had Luna truly returned for one last night? Since that evening, I have felt her presence more than once. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I catch the sensation of tiny paws pressing against the mattress. A ghostly touch, never lingering too long, but always enough to remind me that perhaps love doesn't fade even after death. One particularly chilling night, I heard the softest meow, barely above a whisper, echoing through my apartment. My breath caught in my throat. Luna had been a quiet cat, but she had a particular way of announcing her arrival, one single plaintive meow before she would leap onto my lap. My heart pounded. I turned on my bedside lamp and scanned the room. Empty. But the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. I stared at the foot of my bed, waiting, and then, the sheets moved, just the faintest indent, as if an invisible paw had pressed down into them. A shiver ran down my spine. I reached out, half expecting to feel fur beneath my fingertips, but grasped only air. Sleep became a struggle after that night. Some mornings, I would wake up to find my bedroom door slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had closed it. Other nights, my dreams were filled with the sensation of Luna brushing against my legs, weaving around me as if she were still alive. And then came the cold spots. I had read about them before, areas where the temperature inexplicably drops, supposedly a sign of spiritual activity. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to poor insulation. But the spots were always in the same places, at the foot of my bed, near her old food bowl, and, most disturbingly, on my pillow. One night, I awoke to the distinct feeling of whiskers brushing against my cheek. My heart hammered in my chest. I dared not move. The sensation lasted for only a second, but it was enough to confirm what I already knew. She was here. Was it sleep paralysis? A trick of my grieving mind? Or had Luna really found a way to visit me from beyond? Some may call it imagination. Others might see it as a sign that bonds of love transcend the barriers of life and death. Perhaps our beloved pets never truly leave us. Perhaps, when they sense our sorrow, they find their way back, not to haunt, but to comfort. What do you believe? Have you ever experienced something that made you question the boundaries between the living and the departed? Story 3. Memories have a strange way of lingering. Sometimes like a comforting melody. Other times like an unsettling whisper in the dark. Some childhood recollections fade with time. But others remain, growing more vivid with every passing year. They refuse to be dismissed as simple imagination or childhood nightmares. This is one of those stories. A story that, even now, remains unexplained. A story of unseen hands, ghostly laughter, and an ever-present feeling that something was watching, lurking just beyond sight. I was only 4 or 5 years old when I had my first encounter with something I couldn't explain. My mother had just tucked me into bed, smoothing out the blankets with gentle hands before switching off the light. A faint glow from the hallway seeped into my room for a fleeting moment before she pulled the door shut. I listened as her footsteps receded down the stairs, heading toward the basement where she and my father were laying down new carpet. I curled beneath my blankets, feeling the warmth of my bed, letting the muffled voices from below soothe me toward sleep. And then, it happened. A hand rested on my shoulder. It wasn't a light brush or a passing sensation. It was firm, unmistakable, deliberate, expecting to see one of my parents standing over me. I turned my head. Nothing. No one. A wave of dread crept up my spine. My nightlight cast long, shifting shadows across the walls. But there was nothing in my room that should have touched me. My dog, who usually slept at the foot of my bed, was nowhere in sight. Maybe he had nudged me before settling down? I peered over the edge of my bed, scanning the floor. No dog, no movement, just silence. Fear tightened around my chest. I threw off my covers and sprinted for the door, my small feet barely making a sound against the floorboards as I dashed down the stairs. Bursting into the basement, I found my parents working. My dog curled up in a corner, undisturbed, breathless. I asked them if anyone had been in my room. Had they touched my shoulder? My mother shook her head. You must have been dreaming, sweetheart. But I wasn't dreaming. My father led me back upstairs, doing the usual routine of checking my closet and under the bed. He reassured me that everything was fine, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But even as he tucked me in again, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in that house. Years passed, and we moved out of that home when I was about 10 years old. The strange encounters should have ended there, left behind like old furniture. But they didn't. If anything, they became worse. Our new house was supposed to be a fresh start. But from the moment we moved in, I felt uneasy. It was a persistent sensation, a presence that loomed just beyond my field of vision. Sometimes, it was subtle, a chill against the back of my neck, an inexplicable prickle of awareness. Other times, it was undeniable, shadows shifting at the edges of my sight, things moving just out of reach. And then came the sounds. Footsteps echoing outside my door when no one was there. The sound of faint, childish laughter drifting through the halls late at night. The first time I heard it, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too restless to sleep. The laughter was soft, almost melodic, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. I held my breath, straining to listen, waiting to hear if it was just the wind or a trick of my ears. But it never repeated, not that night, at least. A year later, something even stranger happened. One night, as I lay awake, struggling to drift off, I felt it again. But this time, it wasn't a touch, it was a breath. A cold exhale against my cheek. My entire body locked up. My skin erupted in goosebumps. I didn't dare move. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get up, to run. But fear had its grip on me, keeping me frozen in place. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. I pulled the blanket over my head, squeezing my eyes shut, willing myself to disappear. Sleep didn't come easily that night, but exhaustion eventually claimed me. From that point forward, the presence never truly left. I would catch glimpses of figures in the doorway, standing there one moment, gone the next, the weight of something unseen pressing down at the foot of my bed. The murmurs of voices I could never quite understand. I never told anyone, not really. My parents had already dismissed my fears before, and I had no reason to believe they would react any differently now. So, I kept it to myself, carrying the weight of something I couldn't explain. Even now, years later, I still wonder, did something follow me from that first house? Had it always been there, lurking, waiting? And the most terrifying question of all, is it still here? The unknown has a way of creeping into our lives, lingering at the edges of our understanding. Some may dismiss experiences like these as nothing more than childhood fears, misinterpretations of the mundane. But for those who have lived through the unexplainable, the reality feels far different. Perhaps some places never truly let go of those who once lived within them. Perhaps some entities follow, refusing to be forgotten. What do you think? Have you ever felt something watching you, even when you were sure you were alone? Story 4. The air was thick with the scent of summer, a mixture of cut grass, warm asphalt, and the faint aroma of barbecue smoke drifting through the neighborhood. The sun lingered stubbornly on the horizon, as if reluctant to leave, casting long golden streaks across the quiet streets. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if that lingering daylight was a warning. One final burst of warmth before the cold touch of the unknown settled upon us. I was 10 years old when it happened, during a summer gathering at my Aunt Margaret's house just a few blocks away from home. The backyard buzzed with activity, the sizzle of burgers on the grill, the chatter of aunts exchanging gossip, and the wild energy of younger cousins running in circles, fueled by an endless supply of soda. It was fun, but also overwhelming. A few of my closest cousins and I shared a glance, silently agreeing that it was time for a break from the chaos. We decided to walk back to my house, a short trip that promised an escape into peace and quiet. The evening was warm, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as we strolled down the familiar streets. As we turned the final corner onto my block, my cousin Jeremy suddenly grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Hey," he muttered, his voice lower than usual. "Is your dad home?" I furrowed my brow. "No, he's at work." "Why?" Jeremy hesitated before glancing toward my house. "I thought I saw him sitting on your front bench just now." "But, he's gone." "What do you mean?" I asked, a strange chill prickling the back of my neck despite the heat. "There was a guy sitting there," Jeremy said, dark curly hair, big sunglasses. But when I looked again, he wasn't there anymore. I turned to look. The yard was empty. The old wooden bench creaked slightly in the breeze, but there was no one in sight. A wave of unease washed over me, but I shook it off, forcing a laugh. You probably just imagined it. Still, the thought lingered as we stepped inside. The cool air from the AC was a welcome relief, and we made a beeline for the freezer, pulling out ice cream sandwiches and flopping onto the couch. The tension from the street melted away, replaced by the simple joy of a cold treat on a hot day. Then Jeremy spoke again. I swear I just saw that guy again. He was standing on your front steps. But now he's gone. A silence fell over us. My other cousins exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions mirroring my own growing discomfort. We brushed it off, because what else were we supposed to do? We were just kids. There was no logical explanation. So we forced ourselves to move on. We decided to retreat upstairs to my room, where the world felt smaller and safer. But as we settled in, something changed. The air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the house. Up the stairs. Down again. Then back up. Do you hear that? I whispered, gripping the edge of my bed. No one answered, but the terror in their wide eyes was enough. My heart pounded as I reached for one of my many books on ghosts and witchcraft, flipping through the pages with desperate fingers, searching for, what? A spell? A prayer? Some kind of reassurance that this wasn't real? For over an hour, we sat there, frozen in fear, waiting for the noises to stop. But they didn't. Not until we finally mustered the courage to leave the room, clutching crucifixes and rosary beads that had once felt like mere trinkets. We crept downstairs. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting the house in warmth, as if nothing had happened, as if the presence we had heard pacing just moments before had simply vanished. We didn't linger. We threw open the front door and ran back to my aunt's house, our fear overriding any sense of rationality. In our rush, we left the door swinging open behind us. As we hurried down the street, panting, a truck rolled by, a deep crimson red, its driver's side window open just enough for us to see inside. And there he was. The man with dark curly hair and big sunglasses. He turned his head slowly, raising one hand in a casual wave before driving off. We never saw him again. When we breathlessly recounted what had happened, our parents dismissed it with concern rather than belief. They told us we had let our imaginations run wild. But there was something in their expressions, something dark and unreadable, that told me they weren't as dismissive as they pretended to be. Months passed, and the memory of that night began to fade. That was until my best friend, who lived just a few houses down, told me about the figure he saw in his window. A man with dark curly hair and big sunglasses, on the second floor. Even now, years later, my cousins and I talk about that night with nervous laughter. We try to turn it into a funny childhood ghost story. But there are things we still don't say. Questions we never ask. Like, why did our parents look so afraid when we told them? And why do I still feel like he's watching? Story 5. They say the world we see is only a fraction of what truly exists. Some encounters shake the very foundation of our reality, leaving us with more questions than answers. Tonight, I bring you a chilling tale, one that blurred the lines between the living and the unknown. This is a story of terror, of something unseen yet horrifyingly present, a force that did not just haunt, but physically tormented its victim. This account was shared with me by someone close, a skeptic turned believer, It all began in a seemingly normal house. But what lurked within was anything but ordinary. Lucas never considered himself superstitious. He was a practical man, driven by logic and reason. But his views changed forever during his time in an old rental house in the outskirts of Coldwell, Oregon. The house itself was nothing remarkable, an old, two-story structure that had seen better days. The paint was peeling, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the air always carried a faint, musty smell, as if it had absorbed the past within its walls. Yet, despite its worn appearance, it had a certain charm. Lucas was never one to believe in ghost stories. So when he moved in, he thought nothing of the rumors whispered by the neighbors, stories of previous tenants leaving in the dead of night, never to return. One night, as he lay in bed, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, an unbearable sensation overtook him. It felt as though an invisible hand had reached into his chest, gripping his heart with an unrelenting force. His breaths became shallow, his body paralyzed. Panic surged through him as he struggled to call out, but no sound escaped his lips. The force intensified, tightening around his heart, squeezing as if trying to stop it from beating altogether. Lucas tried to move, to thrash, to fight whatever it was. But he was powerless. Then, as if his tormentor had tired of its game, he was lifted off the bed, his body floating weightlessly for a mere second before he was slammed down with bone-jarring force. The impact rattled through him, leaving his limbs aching. Before he could process what was happening, it happened again, and again. A relentless cycle of being lifted and slammed, as if an unseen entity was toying with him. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The eerie silence of the house returned. But the terror was far from over. The next morning, Lucas examined his body in the bathroom mirror. Bruises had formed along his chest and arms, faint but undeniably there. He had no explanation, no rationalization that could make sense of what had happened. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself it was just a vivid nightmare. But deep down, he knew better. This was not an isolated event. In the weeks that followed, Lucas continued to experience strange occurrences. There were moments when he felt a strong, unseen grip on his arm, yanking it violently and slamming it against furniture. No matter how hard he tried to resist, his body betrayed him, moving under the command of something else. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Stress, sleep paralysis, an overactive imagination. But deep down, he knew this was something beyond his comprehension. Lights flickered at odd hours. Shadows shifted in the corners of his vision, and a low, almost imperceptible whisper would slither through the silence of the house. Objects moved. Small things at first. Keys would be in places he was sure he hadn't left them. Cupboard doors would be open when he swore he had closed them. But then, it escalated. One evening, as he sat in the living room, a picture frame flew off the wall with such force that the glass shattered upon impact. The air in the room felt charged, heavy, suffocating. It was no longer just fear, it was dread. The worst part? He was alone in his suffering. No one else in his family believed him, dismissing his experiences as mere nightmares. But Lucas knew better. It was only when his sister returned home one night that the attacks stopped abruptly. As if the presence feared being caught, it retreated into the shadows. But it was never truly gone. One night, determined to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind, Lucas stayed up with a voice recorder running. Hours passed with nothing but silence. Until, at exactly 3:14 a.m., a low, guttural growl rumbled through the speaker. A voice, faint but undeniable, whispered his name. His blood ran cold. He knew then that whatever had been tormenting him was aware of his attempts to expose it. That night was the last straw. For months, he endured the torment. Then, finally, he moved out, escaping to an apartment in the city where, thankfully, the entity did not seem to follow. But the scars remained, not just physical, but mental, emotional. Even now, he sometimes wakes up in cold sweats, his chest aching as if the invisible grip had never truly left him. Stories like these leave us questioning the unknown. Was it a vengeful spirit? A malevolent force bound to the house? Or something even darker, beyond our understanding? Many believe ghosts can haunt, whisper, and appear as fleeting shadows. But what about those that can touch? That can harm? If such entities exist, then perhaps we are never truly alone, even in the silence of our own homes. Lucas's story reminds us that fear is not always born from what we can see, but from what lurks just beyond our perception. Some houses are more than just old walls and creaky floors, they hold memories, energy, and sometimes, something far more sinister. What do you think? Could something beyond our world have reached out, gripping Lucas in a terrifying embrace? Or is there an explanation hidden beneath layers of fear and the unknown? Some answers may never come. But one thing is certain. There are forces in this world that defy reason. And some doors, once opened, are not so easily closed. Story 6. There are moments in life that leave an imprint on our souls, fragments of time so chilling, so inexplicable, that they shape our perception of the unknown. I have always been drawn to the eerie, to the whispered stories of those who claim to have encountered the supernatural. But nothing quite prepares you for the moment when you find yourself trapped in the middle of a haunting. When the boundary between the living and the dead blurs into a terrifying reality. This is the story of a Good Friday in Brooklyn, where the unseen made itself known in ways I will never forget. I was 10 years old at the time. It was a crisp spring morning in Brooklyn, the kind where the air was still cool from winter's lingering grip, yet carried the first hints of warmth from the approaching summer. My mother had woken up in high spirits, her favorite music filling the apartment as she moved about, tidying up before heading into the bathroom for a shower. I sat on the worn-out sofa in our living room, listening absent-mindedly to the tunes drifting through the apartment. There was nothing particularly unusual about that morning, until I heard the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, they crept across the hardwood floor behind me. Thinking it was my mother, I didn't turn around at first. But the steps didn't follow the natural path she would take to her room. They hesitated, lingering in a way that sent a ripple of unease through my chest. Something felt wrong. I turned my head quickly, expecting to see her standing there, perhaps adjusting a towel or fumbling with something in the hallway. But she wasn't there. The air behind me was empty. A cold prickle climbed up my spine, swallowing my fear. I got up and walked toward the bathroom, my heart pounding just a little harder than before. The sound of running water reassured me that my mother was still in the shower. She hadn't left. She hadn't been in the hallway. I knocked hesitantly. "Mom?" A few seconds passed before she answered. "Yeah? You, did you just walk past me?" There was a pause. "No, honey, I'm still in here." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. When she finally stepped out, steam curling around her from the open door. I told her what I had heard. Her face changed instantly. The playful, relaxed expression faded, replaced by something darker. "That's scary," she murmured, grabbing a towel and wrapping it around her hair. Because I saw a tall shadow through the curtain. A chill swept over me. Neither of us spoke after that. We both wanted to get out of that house as soon as possible. I was eager to go to my aunt's place, away from whatever presence lingered in our home. But the day wasn't done with us yet. As my mother got ready, humming along to the music playing from the radio, something happened that neither of us could explain. Something that would cement my fear of that apartment forever. The front door opened, then slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. And then, a deep, rasping voice filled the space. "That's freaking nice," it sneered. "Keep singing." The words slithered through the air, dripping with malice, mocking the melody my mother had been so carelessly enjoying just moments before. We both froze, our eyes wide with disbelief. My mother's hand, halfway through fixing her hair, trembled slightly as she set down the comb. We turned toward the door, our movements slow, hesitant, and then we saw it. A shadow, tall, imposing, moving toward us. My breath hitched. I didn't think. I just reacted. I squeezed my eyes shut and clutched my mother's arm, gripping it so tightly my fingers ached. A gust of cold wind rushed past us. It wasn't natural. It wasn't a draft from an open window. It was a force, a presence, something unseen brushing against our very skin. And then it was gone. But the fear remained. From that day forward, I refused to stay in that apartment alone. I begged my mother to let me sleep at my aunt's house whenever possible. But even when I wasn't there, the occurrences didn't stop. My mother continued to experience the inexplicable. The shadows never truly disappeared. Sometimes, they were only glimpses, dark figures moving just at the edge of our vision. Other times, they were more, words spoken from nowhere, voices carried by the static of the television or hidden within the lyrics of a song playing just a little too loud. We were never truly alone in that home. Some hauntings are subtle, creeping in like a whisper in the dark. Others are bold, demanding attention, making their presence known in ways that cannot be ignored. What happened in that Brooklyn apartment was something between the two. It was a presence that watched, that spoke, that moved through the spaces we called home. It was the kind of haunting that made you question reality, that left you lying awake at night, listening for footsteps in the dark. I have never forgotten that voice, the one that mocked my mother's singing. That announced itself with an open door and a slammed exit. Even now, I wonder what it was, what it wanted, and if it still lingers in the corners of that old apartment, waiting for someone else to listen. Some things, I suppose, are meant to remain mysteries. But that doesn't mean they aren't real. Story 7. Strange occurrences have always been whispered about in quiet, dimly lit corners of the world. Some dismiss them as figments of imagination, while others swear by the chilling experiences that have left an indelible mark on their lives. Some houses, it seems, carry more than just memories within their walls. This is one such story, a tale of unexplained events, a lingering presence, and a home that refuses to be silent. It all began 4 years ago when I moved into an old house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The house was spacious, with wooden floors that creaked underfoot and walls that bore the marks of time. It had character. An old-world charm that made it feel like a place with history. But in recent months, something had changed. It started subtly. Footsteps in the dead of night. The kind that echoed from the upper floor when I was certain no one was there. At first, I chalked it up to the natural sounds of an aging house. Wood contracts and expands. The mind plays tricks in the darkness. And paranoia feeds off silence. But then came the radio incidents. Whenever someone took a shower in the upstairs bathroom, the radio station would shift on its own. The first few times, I assumed it was just a glitch, an old radio with a faulty dial. But it kept happening, without any visible cause. And then, the feeling started. Being alone in a room no longer felt like solitude. I could feel something, someone, there. A shadow just beyond my field of vision. A presence lurking in the corners. My older sister's room was the most active. It was colder than the rest of the house. And sometimes, shadows moved when no one was in there. My room, on the other hand, was where I felt the entity the most. Almost as if it watched me. One morning, I awoke to a loud crash from the kitchen. Rushing downstairs, I found all of the smaller salad plates scattered across the floor. One of them shattered. The shelf, still intact, held the rest of the plates perfectly in place. There was no way they could have fallen on their own. As days passed, the disturbances escalated. Objects moved inexplicably. The doors creaked open and shut on their own. And the feeling of being watched grew stronger. What was once a home had become something else, something sentient. Something that did not wish to be ignored. One evening, as I sat in the living room, flipping through a book, a shadow flickered in my peripheral vision. When I turned, nothing was there. My sister's door, which had been ajar, slammed shut with such force that the walls seemed to shudder. I sprinted upstairs, heart pounding, and hesitated outside her door. "Are you okay?" I called out, pushing the door open slowly. She wasn't there, but the room was freezing. The curtains billowed slightly, though the windows were shut tight. My breath came out in visible puffs. Then, a whisper, indistinct, just a breath of sound, but unmistakably real. "Leave." I stumbled back, slamming the door shut and bolting downstairs. That night, I barely slept. Every creak and shift of the house amplified in my mind. The following days brought more unsettling encounters. Laughter in the distance when no one else was home. Glimpses of movement in mirrors. A sense of unseen eyes following my every step. My sister, who had always been skeptical, admitted that she, too, had felt it. The air in her room was thick, suffocating, as if something unseen lingered there. Determined to understand what was happening, I started researching the house. What I found sent chills down my spine. Decades ago, a man had died there under mysterious circumstances. Some claimed it was an accident. Others whispered that it was something darker. His body had been found in what was now my sister's room. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to confront whatever lurked in the house. That night, I set up a recording device in my sister's room, leaving it running while the house was empty. The next morning, when I played it back, my blood ran cold, heavy breathing, and then, clear as day, a voice murmuring my name. Then the whispers grew, a chorus of faint voices overlapping, unintelligible at first, then forming words I could barely comprehend. "Why are you here?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, but my silence did not satisfy it. The next night, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, one after another. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight. But before I could, a loud bang echoed through the house. The front door had slammed shut on its own. Fear clawed at my throat. I wasn't safe here anymore. The next morning, I found deep scratches along the wooden floor of my room, 3 long gashes, parallel to each other, as though something with claws had been there. That was the final straw. We moved out within the month. My sister refused to set foot in the house again. And I couldn't blame her. The last night I spent there, I barely slept, haunted by the feeling that someone, was standing just outside my bedroom door. Waiting. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it means harm or if it's merely seeking attention. But one thing is certain, this house is not empty. And whoever or whatever is here is not ready to leave. Some things in this world defy explanation. Perhaps some spirits linger, caught between realms, tethered by unfinished business or an unshakable attachment to a place. Maybe they don't even know they're gone. But the question remains, if you knew a presence was watching, whispering your name in the dead of night, would you still be able to call it home? Story 8. Some stories aren't meant to be forgotten. Some experiences latch onto us like shadows in the night, lurking at the edge of our perception, waiting for the right moment to remind us that they exist. Tonight, I'm going to share a story that has haunted my nights and left me questioning the line between reality and the unknown. Since I was a kid, I've had strange visions and encounters that I could never explain. My parents were always supportive and listened to my stories, but they never seemed overly concerned. My mother, who had a strong belief in the supernatural, used to tell me that I had an active imagination. As I grew older, I realized that these occurrences weren't just childhood fantasies. They followed me wherever I went, no matter what house or apartment I lived in. The experiences always happened between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., often at precisely 2:15 a.m. Sometimes, I would wake up feeling like someone was in the room with me. Other times, I'd feel the sensation of my blankets being pulled off or an eerie presence standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. But despite the strangeness of these moments, I never felt truly afraid. It was unsettling, even annoying at times, but it always felt oddly playful, like whatever was there wasn't malicious. That was until last night. I've been living alone in my apartment for nearly 3 years. It's an old building, the kind where the walls creak for no reason and the pipes groan in the middle of the night. I had always dismissed strange noises as just part of the building's quirks. But what happened last night was different. I went to bed around 1 a.m. I had been exhausted from work and barely remembered falling asleep. I was lying on my stomach, deep in sleep, when suddenly, I felt an immense pressure on the back of my head. It was like someone was pressing my face into the pillow, suffocating me. Panic surged through me, and my first thought was, this is really happening. Instinct kicked in. I tried to move, but it was as if my body was frozen in place. A paralyzing resistance held me down. I fought against it, pushing my arm between my face and the pillow, desperately trying to free myself. I reached backward with my other hand, trying to grab at whatever was there. The words left my mouth in a hoarse, breathless whisper. Stop. And then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure lifted, but it didn't stop. I felt something. Someone try to push me off my bed. A force was shoving me toward the edge. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I fought against it, kicking my legs and pushing back. I could feel myself teetering at the edge of the mattress. And then, in one final burst of strength, I launched myself upward, gasping for air. I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand and flicked it on, bathing the room in warm light. The clock on my nightstand read 2:11 a.m. The air was thick with something unseen, something heavy. My instincts screamed at me that I was not alone. Adrenaline still pumping, I shouted into the empty space, "Leave me alone." The moment the words left my lips, my iPod, silent for hours, suddenly switched on. A song started playing, the volume rising slowly as if someone was turning it up manually. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I stared at the device, watching in horror as the screen glowed eerily in the dim light. My breath hitched when I noticed something else. My bedroom door, which I had left slightly ajar, was now fully closed, not shut, but enough that it had moved from where I last left it. My stomach twisted. Something had been in my room. Something had touched me. For the next hour, I walked through my apartment, checking every corner, every locked door, every possible hiding place. Nothing. No windows were open. No sign that anyone had broken in. I checked my phone, trying to recall if I had set up any motion sensors on my security app. But nothing had triggered them. The thought chilled me even further. Whatever had been in my room wasn't something that could be detected by normal means. My mind raced back to all the years I had dismissed these occurrences. Could this have been escalating for years without me realizing it? Had I simply ignored the signs until now? Was this entity merely playing with me before, and last night had been its first real attempt at harming me? Eventually, I crawled back into bed, pulling the blankets tightly around me. I was exhausted, but the thought of closing my eyes made my skin crawl. The hours crept by as I lay awake, every small creak of the building sending shivers down my spine. The once playful nature of the presence now felt dark, intrusive. I realized then that I was no longer dealing with something harmless. As dawn broke, exhaustion finally overtook me. I dozed off, but the weight of what had happened stayed with me. The question that plagued my mind wasn't if it would happen again, but when. The next day, I did something I had never done before. I reached out for help. I spoke to a friend who was familiar with the paranormal, someone who had experienced similar things. They advised me to keep a journal, to document every occurrence in case it escalated further. They also suggested I burn sage in my apartment, to cleanse the space of any negative energy. That night, I did just that. The scent of burning sage filled the air, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of calm. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't over. Because whatever it wasn't just part of the apartment. It was part of me. Is this a one-time event? Or will it escalate? More importantly, what am I dealing with? And should I take action before it's too late? Story 9. There are moments in life that leave us questioning the unknown. Stories passed down from generation to generation about spirits lingering, unfinished business, and eerie premonitions. Some dismiss these accounts as the mind playing tricks, while others believe in something beyond our comprehension. Tonight, I will share with you a story, a true account of a grandmother who seemingly knew her time had come. A story that blurs the lines between the living and the departed. A story that has left me wondering ever since. 12 years ago, my grandmother passed away, but what makes her death so haunting is the fact that she seemed to predict it. My grandmother had been bedridden for nearly 2 years. Her body frail, yet her mind sharp in ways we didn't always understand. That night, I was staying at her house. It was something I did often, offering company and comfort as she lay in her dimly lit room. She kept a mattress in her closet for me whenever I stayed over. And as I entered her room to retrieve it, a strange sensation crawled up my spine. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was watching me. The dim glow from the bedside lamp cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the space feel smaller, more confined. Then she spoke. Her voice was weak but clear. "Why are you being so rude? Why don't you give these people a drink?" she asked. I froze. There was no one else in the room. Yet, she was speaking as if surrounded by guests. My stomach tightened as I slowly turned to look at her. Her tired eyes weren't focused on me, but on something, or someone, I couldn't see. "Grandma, who are you talking about?" I asked cautiously. She gave a small chuckle. "Oh, don't be silly. Our family. They've come to take me home." My heart pounded. Family? The only family members who weren't here were the ones who had passed away. I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps she was confused, her mind slipping into old memories. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "You should get some rest, Grandma." She reached for my hand, her grip weaker than I'd ever felt before. "I'm leaving with them tonight. You know, it's time." I wanted to dismiss her words as the ramblings of an old woman. But deep down, something felt wrong. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, every shadow seemed to carry a presence I couldn't explain. I kept looking toward her doorway, half expecting to see something, someone, standing there in the dark. The next morning, when I went to check on her, she was gone, lying peacefully in her bed, just as she had promised. That morning, my mother came to pick me up. I was exhausted, still grappling with the eerie events of the night before. When we arrived home, I went straight to my room and collapsed onto my bed, barely able to keep my eyes open. My younger brother, meanwhile, had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room. And that's when it happened. I awoke, but something was wrong. My body was completely paralyzed. I tried to move my arms, my legs, nothing. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. It felt as if a massive weight was pressing down on me, suffocating, trapping me within my own body. A presence was there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, an overwhelming energy. Neither malicious nor kind, just there, watching. The air in my room felt heavy, thick, almost suffocating. I tried to close my eyes, but they wouldn't shut. It was as if something was forcing me to stare at the darkness above me. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow, just barely visible, shifting at the foot of my bed. Panic surged through me. My breathing was shallow, my heartbeat erratic. I was completely helpless. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was gone. The pressure lifted. The room felt normal again. My body jerked as I gasped for air. Drenched in sweat, my limbs ached from the effort of trying to move. I had never experienced anything like that before. It wasn't until much later that I learned about sleep paralysis, a scientific explanation for what I had endured. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. Was it my grandmother? Had she returned one last time to say goodbye? Had she caused it somehow? Or was it simply my mind, overwhelmed by grief and exhaustion, playing cruel tricks on me? I have told this story many times over the years, hoping someone would offer an explanation that made sense. Some say the mind is powerful and can manifest things we don't understand. Others believe that the dead sometimes return, if only for a fleeting moment, to comfort the ones they leave behind. Since that night, I have had other strange experiences, whispers in the silence of an empty room, shadows moving just beyond my line of sight. I sometimes wonder if my grandmother has been watching over me all these years. If she left a piece of herself behind. What do you think? Is it possible that my grandmother knew she was leaving? And did she truly visit me that morning, trapped between two worlds for one final farewell? Or was it all just a strange coincidence? An illusion brought on by grief and fear? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. I will never forget that night. Story 10. Welcome back, dear listeners. Tonight, I want to share with you a chilling experience, one that will make you question reality itself. This story, unlike our previous ones, is particularly eerie because it happened to someone I know personally. It takes place deep within the haunting wilderness of Vermont, where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural seems to blur. So sit back, dim the lights, and prepare to walk with me through the misty trails of the unknown. Last summer, my friend Clara moved to Vermont. With its lush greenery and serene landscapes, it seemed like the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. One weekend, she invited me over, and we decided to take a hike up to Henderson Falls, a well-known scenic spot hidden within the dense forests of the region. It was Clara, her mother, her mom's boyfriend Daniel, Daniel's next-door neighbor Martin, Martin's son Theo, and me. Clara and I, full of enthusiasm, walked ahead of the others, enjoying the fresh air and the crunching of twigs beneath our boots. The deeper we ventured into the woods, the quieter it became. It wasn't just the natural stillness of the forest, there was an odd silence, as if we had stepped into a place where even the wind held its breath. Then, an unsettling feeling crept over us. It was that instinctual sense of being watched, of something unseen lurking just beyond the trees. At first, we dismissed it as paranoia, but the crunch of twigs and rustling of leaves behind us said otherwise. We stopped, exchanged nervous glances, and turned our heads. Nothing. Yet, the feeling persisted. We continued on, trying to shake off the unease. But as we walked, the presence seemed to grow stronger. At one point, Clara whispered, "Do you feel that?" I nodded, my throat dry. It felt as though we weren't alone. That unseen eyes followed our every step. And then, in a moment of reckless curiosity, we started speaking aloud, addressing whatever presence we thought might be there. We weren't joking around or trying to provoke anything, we simply acknowledged it. "If you're there," Clara murmured, "give us a sign." A branch snapped. Close. Too close. We froze, listening. The sound wasn't from an animal, it was deliberate, calculated. My pulse pounded as we quickened our pace. Finally, we reached a fork in the trail, where a weathered wooden sign pointed toward the falls. Relieved, we hurried along, eager to reunite with the others. But something strange happened. The path we had followed disappeared. What had seemed like a clear direction suddenly became a mess of trees and uneven ground. We stood there, bewildered. Then, as if by some cruel trick, we heard Daniel's voice calling us from behind. We turned to find him standing on what was now a clearly marked trail, one that had not been there just moments before. Shaken, we rejoined the group and spent some time at the waterfall before deciding to head back before nightfall. Once again, Clara and I took the lead, hoping to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and whatever had unsettled us earlier. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew darker, and the oppressive presence returned. The silence deepened. Clara suddenly gripped my arm, whispering that she felt strange. "It's like I'm walking through water," she said. "Like, I can hear you, but there's a barrier between us." I felt the air shift behind us. Slowly, I turned my head, and my heart nearly stopped. Two figures were following us. The first was Martin, carrying Theo on his shoulders. The second, a shadowy silhouette, walking in perfect step beside them. I squinted, trying to make out its features. It had no discernible face, no defining characteristics, just a tall, dark shape moving unnaturally smooth through the trees. "Where's Daniel and your mom?" I asked Martin when he caught up to us. "They stopped for a break," he replied casually. I turned back. The shadow figure was still there. If Daniel and Clara's mom had stopped, they wouldn't have been able to keep pace with us. And yet, the shadow continued to follow. Clara, now on the verge of panic, gripped my hand. "We need to run." Just then, from the corner of my eye, a blindingly white shape darted through the trees. A dog, large, almost ghostly in the dimming light, emerged from the shadows. It wasn't a wolf, but it moved with a graceful, spectral energy. Its paws made no sound as it ran, except for when it was within feet of us. Only then did we hear the rustling leaves beneath it. "Did you see that?" I gasped. Clara and Martin nodded. "What the hell is that thing?" Martin muttered, as the dog vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The oppressive feeling around us lifted slightly. Moments later, Daniel and Clara's mother finally caught up, looking perplexed. "Did you guys see that dog?" Clara asked breathlessly. They exchanged puzzled glances. "What dog?" her mother asked. We stared at each other in disbelief. It was impossible for them to have missed it. It was massive, unnaturally white against the darkening woods. And yet, it had been completely invisible to them. The rest of the trip back was a blur. We piled into the car, locking the doors as if that would keep out whatever had been lurking in those woods. None of us spoke much about it after that night, but the memory lingers like a whisper in the dark. There are places in this world where the veil between the living and the dead is thin, so thin that, if you're not careful, you might just step through. Was it a spirit watching over us? A ghostly guardian in the form of a dog? Or something else? Something lurking just out of sight, waiting for the next group of hikers to wander too far? Perhaps we'll never know. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next terrifying tale. Until next time, stay safe. And don't stray too far from the path, because you never know what might be watching.